March 5, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first American hunter-killer group got ready to head out into the Atlantic. Captain Giles Short, the commanding officer of the USS Bogue, looked over a coded message from the 10th Fleet. Ultra-intelligence had figured out German naval messages, showing the location of several U-boat refueling meeting points. Milk Cow submarines U-459 and U-487 were set to refuel wolfpacks working along the convoy paths. The operations officer picked up the secure phone. One escort carrier, helped by 4 destroyer escorts, would hunt the hunters: USS Bogue, USS Belknap, USS George E. Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson. What none of them knew was that this one mission would set off the most disastrous turnaround in submarine warfare history. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. In just 8 months, American hunter-killer groups would smash the myth of U-boat invincibility and make Admiral Karl Dönitz pull back. His entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic had shown both sides that submarine fighting was not just about sinking ships. It was about figuring out the weight of sunk ships. Sink more than the enemy could build, and victory would come. Lose submarines faster than they could be replaced, and defeat was certain. The German Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm had gained control across the Atlantic shipping lanes. In March 1943, wolfpacks sank over 80 ships, totaling almost 500,000 tons. In April, losses would jump to more than 600,000 tons, the high point of the U-boat attacks. The numbers seemed to be in Germany's favor. 20 new U-boats went into service each month, while losses were less than 10 on average. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the head of the U-boat command, had over 400 submarines under his control from his headquarters in France. His wolfpack methods had almost cut the supply line between America and Britain. Convoys SC-121 and HX-229 had been torn apart. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat danger was the only thing that truly scared him during the whole war. The USS Bogue weighed 9,800 tons and carried a crew of 890 men. Her flight deck ran 495 feet, carrying 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But the carrier's best tools were new devices the Germans didn't understand yet. Centimeter wavelength radar that was unseen by German detection gear, high-frequency direction-finding equipment that could pinpoint U-boat radio signals with deadly precision, and carried in the bomb bays of her Avengers. A hidden tool called the Mark 24 mine to hide its real purpose, the acoustic-homing torpedo. The hunter-killer idea was a major change in fighting submarines. Old-fashioned convoy escorts could only respond to attacks, having to choose between chasing submarines and guarding merchant ships. Hunter-killer groups had no such limits. Their only job was to hunt down and sink U-boats wherever they were. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery would later lead Composite Squadron 9 on the Bogue. As a veteran of Atlantic convoy duty, Avery knew that U-boats were most open to attack during 3 key moments: coming up to recharge batteries, getting together with supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, and sending radio reports to Dönitz's headquarters. German submarine rules demanded regular radio messages, position updates every 24 hours, contact reports as soon as they saw convoys, weather notes twice a day, and damage reports after attacks. Each signal was a potential death sentence, giving away the submarine's spot to Allied direction-finding stations. On board U-569, Kapitänleutnant Hans Johansson checked his patrol orders. 7 weeks at sea had used up fuel reserves to dangerously low levels. Radio orders told him to meet up with the Milk Cow U-459 at coordinates 50° 40 minutes north, 35° 21 minutes west. Johansson had been in charge of the submarine since early 1943, taking over from Hans-Peter Hinch, who had led the boat on her earlier missions. U-569 was a Type 7C submarine, the main sub of the German fleet, weighing 769 tons on the surface and 871 tons underwater. She carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men. Her 4 bow tubes and 1 stern tube had sunk 1 merchant ship and damaged another during her service, a small number that showed the more and more risky Atlantic waters. But the submarine's biggest weakness stayed the same since the Great War. Diesel engines needed air to burn fuel, and electric batteries took hours of recharging on top of the water. A Type 6IC could stay underwater for 18 hours at a slow speed, but a fast escape used up the batteries in less than an hour. The American hunter-killer groups took advantage of these problems with exact science. Search patterns were figured out to get the most out of radar coverage. Aircraft patrol times were set to find surfaced submarines. Attack plans were made to keep constant pressure until batteries were worn out. At 2:20 p.m. on May 22, 1943, Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain spotted a surfaced submarine on his radar. Range 18 miles, bearing 090 degree relative. He pointed the nose down and started his attack dive. U-569 was traveling on top of the water at 15 knots. Her diesels recharging empty batteries after a night of getting away. The bridge watch saw the coming aircraft at 8 miles. Alarms blared through the boat as Johansen ordered a quick dive. Quick dive plans for a Type 7C took 35 seconds from the alarm to periscope depth. Water vents opened, diesel engines shut down, and electric motors started. The submarine's bow pointed steeply down as tons of seawater filled the tanks. Lieutenant Chamberlain's pattern of bombs caught U-569 just under the water. 4 Mark 17 depth charges were set for a shallow explosion. The blasts hurt the submarine badly, pushing it back up to the surface. A second Avenger, flown by Howard Roberts, was already in place when the submarine came back up. Roberts attacked right away but stopped shooting when he saw white flags showing up on the submarine's periscope. The crew was giving up. The Canadian destroyer HMCS St. Laurent was sent to the area, but as she got closer, Johansen told his crew to sink the boat and leave it. 25 of the 44 crew members were saved and pulled from the Atlantic. 19 men sank with their boat. Questioning the survivors from U-569 gave Allied intelligence useful information. During questioning, German submariners were amazed at the precision of the American aircraft attacks. "They knew right where we were," one survivor said. "It was as if they could see underwater." But ultra-intelligence had shown more than just single sub-locations. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park had figured out the whole German naval grid system, finding patrol zones, wolfpack meeting spots, and supply meetup locations. Every U-boat at sea was potentially in danger. On June 5, 1943, the USS Bogue's planes found U-217 recharging batteries on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. Kapitan Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinke had led the submarine through 3 patrols, sinking 3 ships for a total of 10,651 tons. Planes from the Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 in the vulnerable moments before it could dive. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged the submarine's diving system. Unable to go underwater, Reichenbach-Klinke ordered his gun crews to fire at the attacking planes, while damage control teams worked frantically to fix the diving planes. The surface fight lasted 18 minutes. U-217's 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft guns fired over 300 rounds. One Wildcat took minor damage from shell pieces, but the submarine was fighting a losing battle against planes made specifically for fighting submarines. An Avenger from Bogue's squadron delivered the final blow with depth charges that landed perfectly around the submarine. The blasts destroyed U-217's pressure hull in several places. The submarine sank with all 50 hands, including Reichenbach-Klinke. No survivors were found in the oil slick that marked her grave. The emotional impact on U-boat crews was immediate and devastating. Radio messages revealed growing worry among submarine commanders about American wonder weapons that seemed to find targets no matter how they tried to escape. Morale reports mentioned crews becoming more and more hesitant to come up for air, even for necessary battery recharging. Admiral Donitz responded to the growing losses with tactical changes. U-boats were ordered to cross the Bay of Biscay underwater, no matter how low their batteries were. Surface refueling was limited to nighttime. Radio signals were cut to the bare minimum. But these actions only put off the unavoidable. The Americans had momentum and technological edges that tactical adjustments could not beat. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups were active in the Atlantic. Each was built around an escort carrier with destroyer escorts. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Core, USS Santee, and USS Croatan showed an industrial power that Germany could never hope to match. The USS Card, led by Captain Arnold Buster Isbell, would become one of the most successful hunter-killer groups of the war. Between July and October 1943, Card's group would be credited with 8 confirmed U-boat kills, earning the first presidential unit citation given to a hunter-killer group. The methods created by Card's team became the standard plan. Planes would fly in growing box patterns from the carrier's position. Surface radar contacts led to immediate attacks. Submarines that quickly dived were marked with dye and chased by destroyer escorts using Hedgehog mortars and depth charges. On August 7, 1943, Card's planes found the Milk Cow U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface. The supply submarine was caught with fuel lines still attached, making a quick dive impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked right away, dropping 4 depth charges that landed on both sides of U-117. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel made a column of fire that could be seen from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to dive quickly but was hurt by the blast. She would get through this time only to be sunk 9 months later in one of the war's strangest battles. Capitan Lieutenant Klaus Bargston, in charge of U-521, saw the destruction of U-117 from periscope depth. His war journal noted the shock felt by U-boat commanders. The Americans show up everywhere at once. Their planes come without warning. Their weapons are unbelievably accurate. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted. October 1943 was a turning point that would shape the rest of the Atlantic War. The U-boat force lost 23 submarines that month, including several experienced commanders who had survived since 1939. Each loss meant irreplaceable experience that training schools could not create again. The sinking of the Milk Cow submarines was especially disastrous. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other. Without the ability to refuel, Type 7IC boats could no longer get to the American coast. Patrol areas shrank to the mid-Atlantic, where hunter-killer groups waited in growing numbers. The USS Corps' hunter-killer group improved the plan of continuous air coverage, keeping planes over suspected U-boat areas for days at a time, wearing out submarine batteries through non-stop pursuit. This method proved incredibly effective against even seasoned commanders. On October 13, 1943, Corps' group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant zur See Erich Maeder, had just turned 26. His lack of experience was clear in how he responded to the attack, trying to fight on the surface instead of diving quickly. 4 Wildcats strafed U-378 while 2 Avengers got into position for depth charge runs. The submarine's anti-aircraft gunners managed to damage 1 Wildcat before being wiped from the conning tower by machine gun fire. Maeder ordered the crew to abandon ship as depth charges broke the pressure hull. Only 1 survivor was pulled from the water. The harshness of these fights shocked even experienced U-boat veterans. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichroth, one of Germany's top aces with 24 ships sunk, barely survived an attack by USS Block Island's planes in October 1943. His submarine, U-109, struggled back to port with heavy damage. Bleichroth never went to sea again, telling other officers, "The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse." November 1943 brought new American developments that further tipped the scales. The use of the MAD, magnetic anomaly detector, allowed planes to find submerged submarines at shallow depths. Sonobuoys, dropped in patterns, could follow submarine movements for hours. The technology gap was becoming impossible to close. Captain Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann led U-405 through 7 successful war patrols. His experience and skill had kept his crew safe through fights that had destroyed lesser boats. He had created ways to avoid planes by using cloud cover and rain to hide his submarine's position. On October 31, 1943, U-405 was with Wolfpack Siegfried when the USS Card's hunter-killer group entered the patrol area. The destroyer USS Bogue got a radar contact at 9 p.m., range 6,500 yards. What happened next would become famous in naval history. U-405 dived quickly but was forced back up by depth charges. Unable to dive again because of damage, Hauptmann chose to fight on the surface with his deck guns. In the dark and rough seas, the 2 ships collided, the Bogue's bow riding up onto U-405's foredeck. For several minutes, the ships were stuck together. Crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at close range. American sailors threw coffee mugs, shell casings, and even a sheath knife at German gunners. The strange fight went on until the ships broke apart. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bore's captain, ordered all guns to fire on the submarine. Over 4,000 rounds of ammo were used as U-405 tried to get away. The submarine's conning tower was full of holes, her deck gun was destroyed, and her hull was punctured below the waterline. Hopman ordered the crew to abandon ship as U-405 sank by the stern. Only 8 of the 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Hopman was not one of them. The Bore herself was so badly damaged in the fight that she had to be sunk the next day. The battle showed that even the most experienced U-boat commanders could no longer survive against determined hunter-killer attacks. The technological leap that made hunter-killers so successful was more than just radar and homing torpedoes. Operations research scientists had created the best search patterns using probability theory. Sound analysis could tell apart individual submarine propeller sounds. Statistical models predicted U-boat actions based on thousands of observations. High-frequency direction finding was especially devastating. German submarine rules required regular radio reports to coordinate wolfpack attacks. Each signal lasted only seconds, but that was long enough for Allied stations to pinpoint their location within a 2-mile circle. U-boat commanders had an impossible choice: stay silent and lose coordination, or send a signal and give away their position. The Germans thought their Enigma code system was still safe. They didn't know that captured codebooks from U-559 in October 1942 had let British codebreakers crack the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence, within hours of being sent. December 1943 saw the sinking of several veteran U-boats that had been around since the war's early days. U-172, led by Kapitänleutnant Hermann Hoffmann, had sunk 26 ships totaling 151,000 tons. Her crew was seen as the best, having come up with new ways to get through escort screens. On December 13th, the USS Bogue's hunter-killer group intercepted U-172 in the mid-Atlantic. The submarine had just sent a weather report, its location given away by direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores. The first attack came from Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler's Avenger, dropping a Fido homing torpedo that U-172's sound operator heard in time to dodge. But dodging required high-speed moves that quickly drained the batteries. Within 2 hours, 3 more planes had shown up to stay in contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate game of survival, coming up briefly to get air, then diving quickly when radar spotted approaching planes. At 8 a.m. on December 14th, with batteries dead and compressed air gone, Hoffmann had no choice but to come up and stay up. U-172's anti-aircraft guns fired at the circling planes while damage control teams tried useless repairs. The surface fight lasted 43 minutes. Destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram closed in on the submarine's position, firing over 400 rounds from their main guns. U-172's hull was pierced in 17 places before she finally went down. 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. 13 survivors were pulled from the water. During questioning, they showed the deep hopelessness among U-boat crews. The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide. We cannot run. We cannot fight well. Every patrol is expected to be our last. By early 1944, the change was complete. The U-boat force that had almost starved Britain into giving up was now being systematically destroyed. January saw 19 U-boats lost. February, 20 more. March, 23. The math of destruction was non-stop and getting faster. Young, inexperienced commanders were being sent to sea with little training. Oberleutnant zur See Wolf-Gero Herre, commanding U-434, was 23 years old with less than 6 months of submarine experience when Card's planes caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight instead of dive, a deadly choice that led to the loss of all hands. The skill gap between American and German forces grew with each fight. American pilots gained hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators learned to tell submarine signals from surface noise at maximum range. Sound operators could identify individual U-boats by their unique propeller sounds, tracking specific boats across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, on the other hand, were getting younger and less skilled. The average age of U-boat commanders had fallen from 32 to 26. Experienced petty officers who were the core of submarine operations were becoming harder to find. Boats sailed with crews who had never been in combat, led by officers who had finished shortened training programs. Admiral Dönitz's son, Peter, was a tragic example of this trend. The younger Dönitz served on U-954 as a watch officer. On May 19, 1943, the submarine was caught on the surface by British escorts and sunk with all hands. The loss of his son did not stop the admiral from sending other young men to similar fates, but it highlighted the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign. Spring 1944 brought new American developments that made U-boat operations almost suicidal. The use of centimetric radar on all hunter-killer planes took away the last refuge of darkness. Lee lights turned night into day, lighting up surfaced submarines from miles away. Even the most experienced commanders could no longer avoid being found. On May 6, 1944, the USS Buckley showed the intensity of hunter-killer operations in one of the war's most unusual encounters. The destroyer escort found U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. Oberleutnant Gerhard Seehausen had led the submarine through 9 patrols, sinking 33 ships. His experience meant nothing against the forces facing him. Unable to dive because of dead batteries, U-66 tried to ram the Buckley. The two ships collided at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together in the dark. German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range. The strange fight included sailors throwing coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades between the ships. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew fired 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammo, and 418 rounds of 40mm shells in 16 minutes. U-66's hull was pierced in dozens of places. The submarine sank with 24 of her 48 crew members. The hand-to-hand fight was the last gasp of an era when submarines could act as surface attackers. The capture of U-505 on June 4, 1944, by Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from the USS Guadalcanal was the ultimate proof of American control. The boarding party from the destroyer escort USS Pillsbury went down through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still moving, seawater pouring in through damaged valves. They closed the seacocks, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence they got was huge. Codebooks, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals fell into American hands. But the symbolic value was even greater. U-boats were no longer scary predators, but prizes to be captured. Their crews prisoners instead of warriors. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought hunter-killer groups into the Bay of Biscay. Hunting U-boats trying to attack invasion ships, the narrow waters became a killing zone. 15 U-boats were sunk in the first week of June alone. Survivors described attacks by dozens of planes at the same time, making escape impossible. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war, described the experience of facing hunter-killer groups. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear the splash of sonobuoys above us. Then the escorts would arrive, maintaining contact for days. We would surface, gasping for air, only to find aircraft already waiting. It was systematic extermination. By August 1944, Dönitz ordered the evacuation of French bases as Allied armies got closer. U-boats trying to get to Norwegian ports faced constant attacks from hunter-killer groups placed along their path. Of 31 boats that tried to make the journey, 11 were destroyed. The survivors arrived with heavy damage and exhausted crews. The introduction of the snorkel breathing tube allowed submarines to run diesels while underwater at periscope depth. But this new device came too late and wasn't good enough. Snorkel-equipped boats were still easy to spot by radar and could only go 6 knots while using it. It was a defensive move, not a return to offensive power. September 1944 saw the use of the most advanced hunter-killer technologies yet. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo had been improved with longer range and better sensitivity. New Hedgehog mortars could cover an area with contact-fused bombs. Radar could spot periscope-sized objects at 5 miles. The technology difference had become total. Fregattenkapitän Günther Jahn, commanding U-1229, saw the sinking of 3 other submarines in his Wolfpack during a single night in October 1944. His war journal noted, "The enemy has abilities we cannot fight. They strike without warning with perfect accuracy. We are not fighting men anymore, but machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy." The last months of 1944 saw U-boat losses reach levels that could not be sustained. November, 24 boats lost. December, 27 boats lost. New construction could not match the destruction. Training centers were bombed. Fuel supplies ran low. The U-boat force was dying, and everyone knew it. Yet Dönitz kept sending boats out, pushed by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to admit defeat. Young men who should have been in school were put in command of submarines after quick training. Whole crews sailed on their first and last patrol at the same time. The hunter-killer groups had turned the Atlantic from a battlefield into an execution ground. The story of U-396 showed this final stage. Herr Commander Oberleutnant zur See Ernst Günther Unterhorst and his whole crew had an average age of 20. They sailed from Norway in November 1944 and were spotted by the USS Corps' hunter-killer group within 3 days. The chase lasted 18 hours. When U-396 finally came up, her batteries dead and air gone, she was immediately destroyed by waiting planes. There were no survivors. Winter 1944-45 brought the snorkel-equipped Type 21 submarines into service. These boats could maintain 16 knots underwater and had advanced sensors. But only 2 became operational before the war's end. The hunter-killer groups had won the race against German technical development through sheer numbers and the systematic destruction of the existing U-boat force. The numbers told the whole story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1944, they sank 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons. The hunter-killer groups had cut German submarine effectiveness by 90%. At their peak, American shipyards were launching over 140 Liberty ships per month, almost 3 every 2 days, each carrying 10,000 tons of goods. The numbers war had become impossible for Germany. By March 1945, the U-boat force mostly existed only on paper. Of 463 boats supposedly available, fewer than 60 were operational. Most stayed in port without fuel, torpedoes, or trained crews. Those that sailed faced certain destruction from hunter-killer groups that had perfected their methods through 2 years of constant operations. The final shame came in April 1945 when U-546 attacked the USS Frederick C. Davis, part of the USS Bogue screen. The destroyer escort sank, but within hours, U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts. It was the last U-boat sunk by Bogue's hunter-killer group, bringing her total to 13 submarines destroyed. Admiral Dönitz's final war journal entry about submarine operations had a bitter admission. The enemy's superiority at sea, particularly in the field of science and technology, has torn from our hands the most effective weapon we possessed. The submarine war has ended in defeat. The change had taken less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats had nearly cut the Atlantic supply line, sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was practically gone, its leftovers hiding in ports or being methodically destroyed at sea. The hunter-killer groups had made this turnaround through the systematic use of better technology, intelligence, and industrial power. They had changed submarine hunting from an art needing guesswork and luck into a science that required precision and persistence. Every part of fighting submarines had been improved through operational research and practical adjustments. The USS Bogue ended the war as the most successful hunter-killer group with 13 confirmed U-boat kills. USS Card claimed 11. USS Corps destroyed 6. These escort carriers and their screens had sunk more submarines than traditional fleet units could have ever thought possible. But their greatest success was not in numbers, but in their methods. They had shown that modern war would be won by nations that could combine intelligence, technology, and industrial production into single fighting systems. Individual skill and bravery, while still important, could not beat a systemic disadvantage. The romantic age of submarine warfare, where a skilled commander could overcome material odds through cleverness and resolve, was over forever. The shock felt by German U-boat captains was not just tactical, but existential. They had entered the war as elite warriors, the gray wolves who would choke Britain's sea supply line. They ended it as hunted animals, trapped between an ocean they could no longer hide in and a homeland they could hardly reach. Corvettenkapitan Peter Kremer, one of only a few U-boat aces to survive the war, would later write, "We had no answer to the hunter-killer groups. They possessed every advantage: radar we couldn't detect, weapons we couldn't evade, intelligence that revealed our every move, and most importantly, the ability to be everywhere at once. We went from predators to prey in what seemed like overnight. The human cost was staggering, beyond belief. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never came back, a death rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol was over 50% by the war's end. Whole graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of finishing their training. American losses, in contrast, were small. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic, the USS Block Island, torpedoed in May 1944, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts during the whole campaign. The exchange ratio, which had once favored U-boats by 10-1, had flipped to favor the Americans by 20-1. The tactical developments created by hunter-killer groups shaped naval warfare for decades. The combination of air and surface ships, the use of intelligence to guide operations, and the use of operational research to improve tactics all became standard practice in modern navies. The Cold War's anti-submarine warfare relied heavily on lessons learned in the Atlantic. But maybe the biggest impact was emotional. The U-boat force had stood for German naval power and technological skill. Its destruction by American hunter-killer groups showed that industrial power and scientific progress would decide future fights. The age of individual heroism had given way to the era of systematic warfare. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the remaining U-boats got Donitz's final order: surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. Of the 49 boats that followed, many were commanded by officers younger than 25. Their crews were made up of teenagers who had never seen combat. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been getting ready to destroy them with the same methodical skill that had marked the entire campaign. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escorts. Herr Commander, Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Emmermann, was 22 years old. He and his entire crew of 36 men were the final losses of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. After the war, analysis showed the smart efficiency of hunter-killer operations. Search patterns had been perfected using probability theory. Weapon delivery was figured out to maximize the chance of a kill while using the least amount of ammo. Communication intercepts were matched with operational patterns to predict U-boat behavior. Every part had been improved through careful analysis and real-world use. The biggest shock for German U-boat captains was not the loss of tactical superiority, but how fast and complete it happened. In March 1943, wolfpacks had almost cut Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction, their bases under constant watch, their communications cracked, their every move predicted and countered. This turnaround happened not because of one single technological breakthrough, but through the systematic combination of multiple advantages: radar that could find submarines day or night, planes that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets no matter how they tried to escape, intelligence that revealed enemy plans before they were carried out, and industrial power that could replace losses faster than the enemy could cause them. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was decided not by individual bravery or skill, but by systematic superiority across many areas. They had turned the Atlantic from a huge hiding place into a clear battlefield where every move was watched, every signal was intercepted, and every mistake was punished with destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, thinking about the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs had a telling line. "I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The legacy of the hunter-killer groups goes beyond their wartime successes. They showed that future naval warfare would be decided by the combination of air and surface forces, the merging of intelligence with operations, and the use of scientific methods for tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War, with their advanced sensors and weapons, were direct descendants of the ideas proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor, their steel hulls slowly dissolving into the deep. They are memorials to the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups, who turned submarine hunting from a desperate defensive action into an offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had joined the service thinking they were part of an elite force that would decide the war's outcome. They found out instead that they were facing an enemy who had changed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this change spread through the ranks of the U-boat force and, ultimately, through naval history itself. The German U-boat force had started 1943 as masters of the Atlantic, their wolfpacks attacking convoys with almost no fear. They ended it as hunted runaways, their bases bombed, their supply lines cut, their experienced crews dead, and their remaining boats hiding in ports or fleeing from relentless pursuit. The shock of this turnaround would echo through naval history as the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial power forever changed the nature of war at sea. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943 to 1945 had shocked German U-boat captains not through better seamanship or courage, qualities both sides had plenty of, but through the systematic use of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority that turned the ocean from a sanctuary into a killing field where precision, not bravery, decided who survived. The final numbers could not be argued with. The hunter-killer groups and their allied partners had sunk 784 German U-boats. They had killed 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not just a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine, operating on its own through stealth and cleverness, was over. The future belonged to integrated naval forces using advanced sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic. They had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter.